a feast like no other. Ah, my boy, you think people today eat strange things? Ha! You should have seen what they called food back in the 16th century. Aye, 500 years ago, when kings ruled by candlelight and peasants bowed for a crust of bread, the dinner table wasn't just for eating, it was a stage. Back then, a meal was a message, a show of power, wealth, and madness, all served on silver plates. Imagine grand halls filled with the smell of roasted meat and melted tallow candles, their smoke swirling like ghosts above the guests. The nobles didn't dine quietly. Oh no, they performed their hunger. The theater of food in the courts of England, France, and Spain, banquets were like royal theaters. Every dish told a story. Peacocks roasted golden, then redressed in their own jeweled feathers to look alive again. Pies so large, birds would fly out when you cut them. Dishes carved into castles, knights, and dragons made from dough and sugar. The clinking of goblets, the sound of a lute, the echo of laughter. It wasn't just supper, lad, it was a spectacle. And the more bizarre the food, the greater your status. You see, the rich didn't want taste, they wanted shock. They wanted to watch their guests tremble as a boar's head, complete with its glass eyes and golden tusks, was carried across the hall, dripping with gravy and pride. The meaning behind the madness. To eat strangely meant to live grandly. A roasted peacock on your table wasn't just meat, it was a symbol of immortality, beauty, and royal vanity. In those times, people believed the world was a grand design. Every animal had a spirit, and eating it meant taking a piece of that spirit inside you. Peasants, poor souls, ate black bread and onion stew, while nobles feasted on animals that looked too noble to eat. But the nobles believed somehow that by consuming the proud, the rare, the beautiful, they could become just as mighty. So when a lord cut into a swan, it wasn't just dinner, it was a ritual. A quiet promise whispered between fork and flame, I am above the common man. The setting of a 16th century feast. Picture it, lad, the grand dining halls of the Tudor court. Torches blazing against stone walls draped with tapestries of knights and saints. Long oak tables polished by years of grease and spilled wine. At the far end sat the lord, towering under a canopy of velvet, wearing a doublet stiff with gold embroidery. The servants, poor souls, marched in lines, each carrying a dish heavier than their arms could bear. First came the soups, then the fish, then the meats. Oh, the meats! Game birds, venison, roasted piglets with apples in their mouths, and sometimes entire deer presented whole, surrounded by smaller animals as if they were attending their master's funeral feast. And the smell, my boy, the smell was wild. Not like your clean kitchens today. It was smoke, spice, wine, sweat, and perfume all blending into one heady scent, the fragrance of excess. Food as a mirror of power. Every forkful reflected the world's hierarchy. The rich ate from gold, the poor ate from wood. At the top tables sat the nobles, close to the fire and the lord. Farther down the table, the meat grew tougher, the bread darker, and the wine thinner. Even the order of dishes told your place in the world. The grandest foods, the swan, the crane, the exotic spices, were served only to those whose titles could justify them. Common guests were lucky to get a bit of pigeon, and yet, behind all this splendor, lay something darker, a fear of famine, disease, and death. The 16th century was no easy time. Food was a luxury one day and a memory the next. So when they had it, they showed it. Every feast was a prayer of gratitude, a scream against hunger itself. The taste of the exotic trade ships were bringing back spices from lands most men could only dream of. Cinnamon from Ceylon, nutmeg from the Banda Islands, pepper from India. Oh, those little black seeds were worth their weight in gold. The rich would sprinkle them on everything, even on fruits and wine, just to show they could afford it. To serve a spiced dish was like saying, I have the world on my table. They even mixed meat with sugar, fish with fruit, and wine with rose water. To our tongues, it would taste strange, but to them, it was the flavor of power. Dining etiquette, a dance of manners. Eating wasn't a casual act, it was a ceremony. The guests washed their hands in rose water before sitting. They shared trenchers, flat pieces of stale bread used as plates. The Lord would take the first bite, and everyone else followed. They ate with knives, not forks, for forks were still new and seen as foreign curiosities. Fingers gleamed with grease and rings, and napkins hung like armor across their chests. To burp was rude, to waste was sinful. But to marvel at the meal, that was your duty. You had to gasp, praise, and applaud as if you were watching a play. Food for the eyes, not the stomach. The strangest thing, lad, was that most of the food wasn't meant to be eaten. It was meant to be seen. Sugar sculptures taller than a man, shaped into castles, saints, and angels, all crumbling away by the night's end. They'd roast entire birds, then sew their feathers back on so it looked alive again. They called these dishes subtleties. And oh, they were subtle indeed. Messages of art, vanity, and pride disguised as dinner. The poor man's view. While the rich dined in gold-lit halls, the poor were boiling cabbage in iron pots. Their bread was black, their beer was thin, and meat. Ah, meat was a dream. Sometimes a poor man would sneak close to the castle windows just to smell the feasts. That smell was hope and torment all at once. You see, food divided people. It showed who ruled and who served, and in a way, every feast was a reminder of that cruel truth. So, lad, when you hear of roasted peacocks and gilded pies, don't think of them as just meals. Think of them as mirrors of a time when men believed that the world itself could be eaten, piece by piece, feather by feather. In those candle-lit halls, they weren't just feeding their bellies, they were feeding their dreams. Ah, those were strange times indeed, the kind of times when even hunger had a crown. The dishes that shocked the table. Ha! You think your spicy noodles or fried insects are strange? Ah, lad, you've seen nothing yet. Back in the 16th century, the dinner table was a theater of madness. Every meal came with a gasp, a whisper, and sometimes a scream. You see, for the nobles of that time, the stranger the dish, the grander the feast, the more shocking the food, the higher the prestige. A man's courage wasn't tested on the battlefield, oh no, it was tested at supper. Roasted peacock, the bird of immortality. Now picture this, a roasted peacock, its flesh cooked golden brown, but its feathers perfectly reattached after roasting. The chefs, artists more than cooks, would carefully sew the bird's brilliant feathers back on, its head raised proudly, beak open as if ready to cry. And sometimes they even lit brandy beneath its tail so it appeared to breathe fire. It wasn't meant to feed hunger, lad. It was meant to feed pride. To serve a peacock was to serve immortality itself. The bird's beauty, its vanity, all captured in a dish too magnificent to eat. But the guests did eat it, slicing into that gilded bird, whispering that its flesh carried the strength of the heavens. Some believed that eating peacock made one incorruptible, that your body would resist decay. a foolish hope, but a beautiful one. Beaver tails, the fish that wasn't now. Here's a trick of both faith and flavor. The church forbade meat on Fridays and during Lent. No beef, no pork, no fowl. But the clever folk of the 16th century found a loophole. They called the beaver's tail a fish. You see, it lived in water, had scales on its tail, and swam. So by that logic, it was fair game. Monks and nobles alike roasted it over open fires during fasting days, its fatty meat crackling and spitting. The rich would glaze it in honey or soak it in wine and feast with smug satisfaction, knowing they were both holy and indulgent. Ah, humans, always good at bending rules, especially when hunger's involved. Blackbird pies, the feast that sang. Now this one was pure spectacle. Imagine a massive pie brought before a king. The crust is golden, the scent sweet and savory. The court leans in as the blade cuts through the crust, and suddenly dozens of blackbirds fly out, singing and flapping across the hall. It was a living dish. Chefs would bake the crust separately, then hide live birds inside just before serving. It was dangerous, cruel even, but oh, how it impressed the guests. They'd laugh, clap, and sing that nursery rhyme centuries later. 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. For the nobles, it wasn't enough for food to taste good. It had to shock, move, and amaze. The lamprey, the blood eel of kings. Then came the lamprey, a creature from nightmares. Long as a man's arm, slimy and eel-like, with a mouth full of circular teeth like a saw. And yet, kings adored it. King Henry I of England loved lampreys so much, they say he died from eating too many. Cooked in wine and spice, thickened with blood and vinegar, it was considered a noble delicacy. Its taste, like the sea and iron mixed together, its texture, soft, almost like flesh. To eat lamprey was to prove your wealth, for only the finest kitchens could tame such a beast. But to look at it, oh, it was enough to make your stomach turn. Stuffed swan, the royal ghost, the swan, the symbol of grace and purity, the bird of poets and kings. Yet in the 16th century, they cooked it. The swan wasn't for everyone. It was a royal privilege reserved by law for the crown or the nobility. Killing one without permission was a crime. But during grand feasts, the swan was served whole, its feathers restored, its beak gilded, its wings outstretched as if it were ready to fly from the table. They'd stuff it with herbs, fruits, sometimes even smaller birds, and bake it until the hall smelled of sweet rot and splendor. To eat a swan was not just luxury, it was dominion. You were eating a creature once untouchable, and that, lad, was the purest sign of power. Hedgehogs, frogs, and field creatures. Not all shocking dishes were grand. Some were born of desperation, others of curiosity. In poor villages and remote manors, cooks prepared what they had. Hedgehogs roasted whole, frogs stewed with garlic, or sparrows baked into pies. The hedgehogs, they'd say, tasted like game, once the spines were carefully singed away. Frogs, meanwhile, were thought to cool the body and cure fevers. But the nobles, they sometimes joined in these experiments, calling them rare curiosities. They loved to taste the forbidden, the humble turned exotic. It wasn't hunger that drove them, it was boredom. Fermented fish and rotting delicacies. In the colder north, in Scandinavia and parts of England, preservation was a craft of survival. Fish and meats were buried in salt, left to ferment, or smoked until black. Some dishes, like fermented sturgeon or shark, had a smell that could knock a man off his feet, yet the people who grew up with it, they loved it. To them it was flavor, deep, ancestral, enduring. To outsiders, it was horror on a plate. And that's the strange thing, lad. What disgusts one nation is sacred to another. Taste is born from need, not luxury. Meat and sugar, the unholy marriage. One of the strangest habits of that time was their love of mixing meat and sweetness. Roast beef covered in cinnamon, pork pies filled with raisins, chicken cooked in sugar syrup and rose water. Sugar was a new luxury, imported and costly, a symbol of refinement. So they used it everywhere. The more sugar, the higher your class. Imagine chewing on a spicy sweet goose leg while drinking hot wine thick with honey and pepper. It sounds wild now, but in those days, that was elegance itself. The daring drinkers. And it wasn't just the food. The drinks were just as bold. Ale spiced with clove, wine mixed with eggs, milk or melted sugar, even beer steeped with herbs and fruit. They drank mead, honey wine, believing it made them young. They toasted until their tongues forgot their names, goblets clinking under candlelight. And when the drink was gone, the songs began, stories of hunts, loves, and ghosts. By the end of the feast, the air was thick, part laughter, part smoke, part madness. The price of indulgence. But behind the laughter, there was danger. Many nobles grew sick from spoiled meat, bad wine, or contaminated dishes. They didn't know about bacteria. To them, sickness was caused by bad humors or curses. Still, they ate fearlessly. They believed the more bizarre, the more divine. And so at every grand table, beauty and decay sat side by side. The candle burned bright, and the rot crept quietly underneath. So remember, lad, when you see those shining banquets and old paintings, don't be fooled by the splendor. Behind every silver platter, there was the smell of fire, blood, and vanity. They ate not to live, but to be remembered. Pause. Fire crackles, wind outside. Aye, the dishes that shocked the table shocked the soul too. And yet, we still chase that same hunger to impress, to dazzle, to taste something forbidden. Strange, isn't it? 500 years have passed, and we're still hungry for wonder, the secret ingredients of the past. Ah, lad, you've seen the feasts and the peacocks. You've smelled the roasted swans and laughed at the nobles swallowing frogs whole. But now, let me tell you what they didn't want written in the books. The secrets, the powders, the hidden things that flavored the 16th century, not just the tongue, but the mind. The truth, my boy, is this. The real spice of the old world wasn't pepper or cinnamon. It was power, and power had a taste, bitter, sweet, and sometimes poisonous. The apothecary's table, where medicine met the meal. In the 1500s, the kitchen and the apothecary were not far apart. In grand manners, a cook might grind his herbs beside a healer. Jars of rosemary stood beside vials of mercury, honey mixed with crushed pearls. The line between health and hunger blurred like smoke. A noble might ask his cook for a dish that purifies the blood, and out came a stew of almonds, saffron, and powdered coral. Powdered coral, lad. The same sea rock that lined the ocean floor, ground to dust and swallowed for beauty's sake. Every flavor had meaning. Nutmeg was for wealth, cloves for courage, saffron for immortality, and mercury, yes, the deadly silver liquid, was whispered to balance the humors. They believed poison could heal if taken in the right dose. That was the mystery of their world, a feast both delightful and dangerous. Eat, and you might live longer, they said. Eat too much, and you'll die beautiful. The gardens of earth and alchemy. Beyond the castle walls, hidden gardens grew strange and powerful things. Monks tended them by moonlight, gardens where the air smelled of mint and death, where mandrake roots screamed when pulled from the soil. In the 16th century, food was not just sustenance, it was alchemy. The cooks of kings acted like sorcerers. They blended nature with belief. A pinch of salt was sacred, a grain blessed to drive away demons. And when famine came, they turned to what others feared: moss, acorns, bark, ground into bread. In secret, they even used ashes, human and animal, believing that by consuming what once lived, one might inherit its strength. Even the color of food carried meaning: gold for divinity, red for life and passion, black for wisdom, or for mourning. So, when a royal chef dyed a dish with squid ink or a charred bone powder, it wasn't just for taste, it was for power. Each meal was a silent spell cast upon the body and soul. The power of salt, the crystal crown. Listen closely, lad. You may not think much of salt today, a pinch, a shake, nothing more. But back then, salt was treasure. Wars were fought over it. Kings hoarded it like gold, and a man's worth could be measured by how much of it lay upon his table. In the grand banquets of the 16th century, a block of carved salt, the salt cellar, stood in the center of the table like a throne. Those who sat above it were noble, those below were not. Below the salt, they said, meant beneath in rank and respect. And yet, salt was more than symbol, it was life. In a world without refrigeration, salt preserved everything: meat, fish, vegetables, even fruit. It kept rot at bay, or so they believed. But salt could not preserve everything. There were feasts where power rotted faster than flesh. Kings died with salt at their lips and secrets in their cups. The alchemists' gold, saffron, and false riches. Ah, saffron, the sun trapped in a petal, the rarest spice of them all. It cost more than gold, lad, and was worth dying for. Each thread was hand-plucked from the crocus flower, and a single ounce could buy a house. So what did the desperate do? They cheated. In the alleys of Venice and Bruges, false merchants dyed hay and silk with ochre, selling it as saffron. If caught, their punishment was brutal: death by fire. For to fake saffron was to fake royalty itself. And the nobles sprinkled it over everything: pies, soups, even wine. A meal without saffron was a meal without sun. But those bright dishes hid darkness, for more than one king's feast ended with illness, when fake saffron brought not warmth, but poison, blood, wine, and the taste of immortality. Wine, ah, the river that flowed through every feast of the old world. But wine, too, had its secrets. In the 16th century, many believed that the secret to youth lay not in prayers, but in blood. Some mixed animal blood into their wines, others boiled it into jellies or broth, claiming it gave vital energy. And there were darker tales, whispered ones, of noble women bathing in young blood to preserve their beauty. You see, my boy, the table was not just where they ate, it was where they sought eternity. Every bite was a bargain, every cup a confession. When they raised their goblets, they didn't just toast to health, they toasted to the hope of defying death itself. Powdered pearls and liquid gold royalty believed they were closer to gods than men, and so they ate like gods. Pearls crushed into powder and stirred into wine, gold leaf laid upon pastry, even mercury-laced tonics in silver cups. They thought these would make them radiant, unearthly, immune to decay. But beauty bought with poison never lasts. The queen's smile gleamed, but her teeth crumbled. The lord's skin glowed, but his veins blackened. And when they died, Their coffins gleamed with the same gold they had once swallowed. It was a cruel poetry, to be killed by the very thing that made you shine, the spice roots and the shadow of empire. While nobles feasted far beyond the seas, men risked their lives for flavor. The spice roots, long dangerous paths across deserts and oceans, brought cinnamon from Ceylon, pepper from India, nutmeg from the Banda Islands. Ships sank. Sailors starved, but still they sailed, for a handful of spice was worth a kingdom, and in every grain of pepper that touched a noble's tongue lay the story of conquest, slavery, and ambition. So when the nobles laughed and sprinkled pepper upon their swan or pheasant, they were tasting the sweat and blood of the world. Food was never just food, it was empire on a plate. The secret of flavor: smoke, rot, and time. Before refrigeration, rot was an art form. They aged meats until the air itself seemed to hum with scent. They smoked, brined, pickled, and buried. Every flavor was a form of preservation, every preservation a gamble. Some dishes tasted divine, others brought death. To the old world, freshness was not a virtue. Aged cheese crawling with maggots was delicacy. Fermented fish sauce was gold. The smellier the meal, the closer it was to paradise. You see, in that century, flavor was alchemy, decay transformed into delight. It was proof that life could be wrestled from death, and that taste could tame time itself. The hidden ingredient: faith, and finally, lad, the truest secret of them all: faith. They believed every flavor was divine. Before a meal, prayers were whispered not for taste, but for mercy. For to eat was to take part in creation itself. Monks fasted for purity, while nobles feasted for glory. But both believed that what entered the mouth could shape the soul. And when famine struck, they looked heavenward, blaming not the soil or the king, but sin itself. To them, the tongue was holy, the stomach a chapel, and food was a kind of prayer. So, my boy, remember this. When you see an old recipe or smell a faint trace of spice on parchment, you're not just catching scent of cinnamon or saffron. You're breathing in the ghosts of an age gone by. They lived in a world where a meal could crown a king or kill one, where salt drew borders and sugar hid sin, where poison and perfume came from the same bottle, and perhaps that's the greatest secret of them all, that every bite of history carries the taste of those who dared to make it. Now go, lad, and remember, the past still lingers on the tongue.
Aye, lad, all feasts must end. The candles that once burned over gold-plated tables now flicker low, and the dishes that once made kings boast began to fade like old stories whispered too many times. In the late 16th century, the world began to change. The age of discovery had filled kitchens with spices, but also with fear. New diseases, new rules from the church, new whispers that some foods were unholy. People began to see those strange dishes: roasted peacocks, gilded swans, and beaver tails, not as wonders, but as warnings. Too rich, too sinful, too proud. The peasants, once awed by the feasts of nobles, now shook their heads. The clergy preached against excess, claiming that gluttony turned man from God. And so the tables grew simpler, the colors faded. The world, once filled with cinnamon smoke and shimmering feathers, turned to bread, broth, and salt. Even the mighty banquet halls began to echo differently, not with laughter, but with restraint. Food was no longer a theater of power. It became a mirror of fear. Strange, isn't it? Once men ate to show off their wealth. Now we eat to survive. The strangest foods of our past weren't born from hunger, but from pride. And pride, my boy, always spoils faster than meat.